Thanks, Juliet. So I also want to take it back to COP because I think there were some interesting experiences there that were very validating of some of what we got from the actual mapping. And I was at COP also with my colleague Lauren negotiating in the Just Transition Work Program. So I'll reflect back on some of the experiences there. I was actually representing Kenya. I'm South African, living in the UK, so I've got a bit of an identity crisis. So I was supporting the African group at COP negotiating the Just Transition Work Program, and three things came out for me that I think are relevant today. The first is there isn't clarity on what a just transition is, and that makes it very difficult to move forward. And in the context of developing countries, developed countries, there's two aspects that are important here. The one is, where is the focus? So a lot of the focus has been on the energy sector, on workers negatively impacted, the vulnerable, and that's absolutely relevant and important. But I think the part that's missing some focus is really what the Global South is asking for, which is fair access to the benefits. So fair access to the economic opportunities associated with the transition. So while there's a lot of different aspects, that's the part that we're really struggling with. So in terms of agency, those are some of the actors, and that's what they're asking for. The second is, in the context of that lack of clarity, it really poses a risk around a potential lack of accountability. Because now the private sector and non-state actors have a role to play, governments have a role to play, but what role? Whose role? And so we need to guard against that. I don't know the answers to that, but we need to recognize that that's a real risk. The second is really around the explicit inclusion of non-state actors and private sector in that in the finance goal that was agreed, but it's very ambiguous. But what's clear is that the private sector is going to play not only a role in implementing, but also a role in driving policies and the rules that are going to shape this. And that was quite a big shift at this COP. And then the third was just this feeling coming from the frustration of being in the African group, probably more than others, just that we are not going to achieve the Paris goals without a just transition. And it is fundamental. And without a just transition, we're looking at pushback, we're looking at migration, we're looking at conflicts, and we're not going to achieve the Paris goals. So it's fundamental. So within that context, what does it mean for business and non-state actors? So I think there's a critical role to play, both in directly contributing to a just transition. So, in your investments, but there I think it's important to recognize the challenge around, getting myself excited, around the business case is not strong in the short term. And so there's a critical role, particularly for grant funding and for patience and risk-taking capital. But then I think more importantly is in every other aspect of what the private sector is doing to integrate the just transition into what you're doing. So if you've got a transition plan, for example, which includes your business plan, your business strategy, your decarbonization strategy, your transition strategy, that justice and equity is integrated into that. If you're making investments, that you're considering how those investments are contributing to or hindering the just transition. And so how to do that is part of what we were exploring here. So the first thing is understand the impacts. Look at what you're doing and consider how that impacts others, and particularly their ability to implement their own just transitions. So, for example, if you're setting a target in your value chain, scope 3 targets, for example, what is the impact on the suppliers? Are they able to decarbonize? Are they going to be left unable to transition, and therefore they lose the economic benefits, they lose the value that they've been able to carve? And importantly, where are they? Who are they? Are they vulnerable groups? Are they in the global south? The second is around agency. Are you inadvertently, unintentionally taking agency away from actors in this transition? And the focus on decarbonization and reducing greenhouse gases is critical, but it often comes with these unintended consequences. And so we really need to understand how are we either contributing to or hindering agency and respond appropriately. And then the third is around accountability. So I think in that context, the real challenge is, without knowing what we're going to do, without having metrics, clear metrics around what needs to be done, it's important that you can understand the trade-offs that you're making, because there are tensions and there are trade-offs, and have done the work that you understand those impacts, that you can stand up and you can be held accountable But you can also hold your stakeholders to account. What we're finding is a lot of stakeholders, let's say, for example, you're a company and you've got investors requiring things of you. Often those expectations and requirements don't take into consideration the just transition implications. So you also need to hold your stakeholders to account. And then we've got a range of other findings that came up, and I don't have a lot of time, but I'd encourage you to go and have a look at it around engaging and partnering, iterating. We don't have time, so we have to learn by doing. We need to experiment. We need to get to those corners to see what's around them. But I think the final point that I just wanted to add is there's a need to step up. Because I think, going back to the point I raised at the beginning, for the private sector and non-state actors, without them playing that leading role, not just waiting on governments and cops, but playing a leading role, we're not going to deliver the just transition, and therefore we're not going to deliver the Paris goals.